Hello and welcome back to another Doctor Who Big Finish festive edition. Yes, we've got a festive Big Finish review, as you can tell by the hat and the tinsel there. Very festive, as you can see. Before we dive into this festive Big Finish video, I just want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. So what is this video all about, I hear you ask? Well, it's basically me recommending you some festive Big Finish stories. Now, I haven't listened to every festive Big Finish story. There are a few short trips I haven't listened to, like a few 7th Doctor ones and a 1st Doctor one. So yeah, these stories are in no particular order. They're just festive stories what I've listened to, and I thought, hey, let's do a list. But they're in no particular order. I have done a Halloween spooky version of this, so I'll leave a little card thing there, a link in the description below to that sort of spooky one. But this is the festive edition because of the hat and the tinsel and some Christmas stories. So let's dive into this list in no particular order. Kicking off this list, I think it's probably best to get the obvious one out of the way and keeps it a bit more interesting. And that is, of course, The Chimes of Midnight. Voted the #1 Big Finish story of all time on multiple occasions. So yeah, you know it's good. Let's move on to the next story. Right, I bet you want me to talk about the story? Then yeah, I'll talk about the story. So The Chimes of Midnight, for me, sort of become a tradition to listen to it at Christmas Eve. You know, Christmas wouldn't be Christmas without The Chimes of Midnight or Plum Pudding, because Plum Pudding's good. If you've listened to The Chimes of Midnight, then you'll know. And if you've not listened to The Chimes of Midnight and you see a load of people tweeting about Plum Pudding at Big Finish, then that's where it comes from. So it is a murder mystery. It's basically Doctor Who does upstairs, downstairs, but with a more grim fate with it, because the Doctor and Charlie have to solve a murder of Edith, this sort of sculler maid, and the characters are very much expecting the Doctor. You know, they think, oh yeah, you're from Scotland Yard. So it's very interesting, but there's this sort of creepy entity in the house, and how it all relates to Charlie as a character. You could argue that, you know, to understand this story, you probably would need a little prior context to maybe listen to Storm Warning. But it is a brilliant story. I mean, like I've said, this is normally voted the #1 Big Finish story of all time, so you know it is incredibly good. And it's on Spotify, so if you have a Spotify account, then, you know, listen to it, because it is a really good story by Rob Sherman, the person who wrote Dalek. Again, more proof that it is a fantastic story. Paul McGann is on fine form. Part 3's cliffhanger is just absolutely chilling, and the house entity, oh, brilliant stuff. Really, really good story, and the deaths are in it are quite grim. It's quite dark for a Christmas story, but hey, what can you do? My next festive recommendation is the 2019 anthology release Blood on Santa's Claws. Now, it's kind of wrong to say that it's an anthology, but from the outside of this release, it technically is, because it's 4 separate stories, but they all sort of link into the final part of this. It's the 6th Doctor and Perry and her boyfriend Joe. So yeah, let's talk about the 4 stories. So the first story, Blood on Santa's Claw, which is a fun one, because you get the 6th Doctor dressing up pretending to be Father Christmas. If that doesn't sell this release, I don't know what will. So yeah, it's basically, there's a load of different religions in the 59th century, so it's basically these miners, but they're sort of Wind of the Willow characters, but they're people that worship the wind and the willows, versus this sort of Shakespeare religion. Then we move on to the next story, The Baby Awakens, which is a fantastic story for Perry. Really puts Perry through an emotional trauma with the whole idea of these sort of designer babies. And that's all I can really say on that without sort of spoiling it. Because yeah, it's a very good story for Perry. Really good story for Perry. And then we move on to the 3rd story, which is I Wish It Could Be Christmas Every Day, because there's a Christmas party, what's been happening on for 3 years. Yeah, a Christmas party, what's been going on for 3 years. Blimey, they must be partied out by now. But yeah, it's a really interesting story, and the cliffhanger leads into the next story, which is Brightly Shone the Moon That Night, which basically uses all the plot points what was set up in the previous stories, and it sort of wraps them all up into this sort of grand finale, as it were, because they are, you know, 3 separate stories, but they all lead to this one last story where we are introduced to a very interesting concept of these Time Lords, basically werewolves that are Time Lords, what help the Time Lords fight in the Vampire War, the Great Vampire War, and the way they regenerate is quite an interesting concept. And that's all I can really say, because I don't really want to spoil that, because that's quite a fun little story. But it's definitely a really fun, festive anthology, full of great fun, and I love it. I love how it all links to it, because it's a very clever way, well, Nev Fountain's done, of linking all the little 4 stories together. So yeah, really great little story that. My next recommendation is the Series 4 opener of the Lucy Miller Adventures Death in Blackpool. Now, this is sort of the last part in a trilogy which started off in the horror of glam rock, and sort of the middle part is the Zygon Who Fell to Earth, and concluding in Death in Blackpool, the sort of Auntie Pat trilogy. I think that's what they've called it. And it's sort of, you know, to enjoy this story, I do feel like you need that prior knowledge, especially for Auntie Pat as a character, because we see the 8th Doctor and Lucy return to the service station where the events of Horror of Glam Rock took place, and they meet with Auntie Pat. Now, the start of this story, it starts off quite fun, feels very new series-esque, you know, sort of the RTD sort of Christmas flourish to it in a way. But then the story takes a bit of a dark turn. You've got this sort of comic relief character in the form of this sort of brummy Santa, you know, him sort of complaining, oh, people don't believe in Father Christmas anymore. And then you kind of get a dark turn with what happens to Lucy within it. We explore sort of Zygon technology a lot more in sort of a different sort of strand of Zygons as well, which is very cool, and sort of how it's quite an emotional story. I say that it's a very emotional story. I don't really want to say too much on it because it's a really good story. It's a really good story, and the final scene between the 8th Doctor and Lucy, just beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Yeah, again, it's quite a bleak one, but you know, Death in Blackpool, everyone. So my next Christmas story I'm going to be recommending is a little bit unfair because it is a subscriber short trip called the Christmas Dimension. So if you are a subscriber to Big Finish, to the main range, and you have the releases Absolute Power or Quicksilver in your account, then you'll be able to listen to this. It's a fun little half-an-hour adventure featuring the 3rd Doctor, Liz and Benton, because we see the 3rd Doctor cooking a Christmas dinner, but the 3rd Doctor, being the 3rd Doctor, has all these fancy gadgets to cook the Christmas dinner, much like a solar oven, all that kind of thing. It's all very fun, and it's nice to have more sort of Liz Shaw stories, because obviously Liz Shaw is very under sort of used in terms of expanded media, and obviously she only has a 4 TV story, so it's an absolute delight. And season 7 is one of my favourite Doctor Who seasons of all time. But yeah, let's say the 3rd Doctor's cooking doesn't go to plan because there's this dimension appear, but there's this sort of disc appears in the sky and it's snowing, and obviously the 3rd Doctor and gang investigate it and sort of ruins their Christmas in a way. But it's quite clever how it all links to it. I don't really want to spoil it because it's a fun little half-an-hour adventure, and let's say that the 3rd Doctor and Liz and Benton do get their Christmas dinner, but just in a slightly different form. Not burnt, but very different to what was planned. But it's a really fun little story, and I just like having a Christmas Pertwee story. I love it. Moving on, we have another 8th Doctor release, and that is part of the Ravenous 2 box set, and that is a 2-part story which is called Better Watch Out and the Fairy Tale of Salzburg by John Dorney. Now, if you followed my channel since 2018, then you know that I absolutely adore Ravenous 2. It's a fantastic box set full of great horror stories. So why have I picked this? Because it's a festive story, because it features the Krampus, as we see the Doctor, Liv and Helen go to Salzburg and just wander around some Christmas markets, which is really wonderful. It really establishes that TARDIS team's dynamic. McGann's in his absolute element, with him sort of going, oh, what sort of Frankfurt should I get, you know, and he's like, oh, pick the one with the funniest name, that's normally how I do it. I think that's a really lovely touch to it, but there's sort of a timey-wimey aspect to it, in the sense that the 8th Doctor sort of telling a story, you know, he's sort of laying down the foundations of what the Krampus is, and let's say all hell breaks loose with these imps taking people away to hell, which is explained in the second half, which we sort of go prior to the events of this story on what's led up to the Krampus actually appearing in real life. And we have the appearance of St. Nicholas, the inspiration for Father Christmas. So it's incredibly festive, it's great little horror story. The Krampus sound design is excellent. McGann is brilliant, especially when he's telling this sort of bedtime story. It's really, really wonderful, and I absolutely love it. Just shows how brilliant Liv and Helen and the 8th Doctor are. It's just a wonderful thing just to see them wandering around these Christmas markets before all hell breaks loose, quite literally, when these imps and demons come to take people to hell. It's just a fantastic story, and I highly recommend it. It's just great how it all links into the grand scheme of it, and this Fairy Tale of Salzburg is, again, a really great way of utilising time. It's a fantastic story, and if you've listened to Ravenous 4, it has even more context to it now, because you're like, oh, that really links into that. It's really good how it all links, and I absolutely love it. And this two-parter, probably one of my favourite Eighth Doctor stories of all time. I just love Better Watch Out and the Fairy Tale of Salzburg. My next festive recommendation, that's a little clue, is The Grey Man of the Mountain. A very recent Big Finish release, released this month as well, featuring the 7th Doctor, Ace and the Brigadier. I've recently done a full review of it, so if you want to check out my full thoughts on this one, please do check out the review. I'll leave a little card thing there and a link in the description below to that review. So we see the 7th Doctor and Ace arrive in Scotland, while the Brigadier is preparing an expedition up Ben Macdui, which is the second highest point in Scotland and is said to be a haunted mountain. You've heard of haunted houses, but now we've got a haunted mountain. It's said that it's haunted by this grey man, where people sense a presence, can hear footprints, and just makes people feel very uneasy. So the Brigadier wants to investigate it, because there have been 5 people have come down from the mountain and are paranoid and are just paralysed by fear, and 2 people have gone missing. So this causes the Brigadier into action after the events of Battlefield, because we really do get the sense of the Brigadier's sense of duty, because he couldn't really go back into retirement after dealing with Morgaine from Battlefield. So this is a really great story. The Grey Man is creepy. It's got a very creepy, unsettling atmosphere. The 7th Doctor has a great speech about fear and paranoia, what's lurking in the mist. A great characterisation of Ace, because she meets up with a character called Kirsty, and they have quite an interesting relationship. I won't spoil it, I'll let you discover that if you want to listen to this story. But it is a really good story, great story to listen to, and it's just lovely to think that the 7th Doctor and the Brigadier having a cup of tea and eating a mince pie. It's just very cool, and I love the idea of the Grey Man. I love it when Doctor Who takes sort of folklore tales and myths and legends and puts their own Doctor Who spin on it, and I think that's why I really like The Grey Man of the Mountain. My next Christmas recommendation is Find and Replace, featuring the 3rd Doctor, Jo and Iris Wildthyme, as we see an older Jo bump into a character called Huxley, who's sort of a Big Finish regular in a way. He's sort of this biographer sort of type character, fascinated, wants to learn about different people's lives, as appeared in A Jago Life story and with Turlough, but I think that this is his introduction story, where he wants to learn about Jo's travels with Iris Wildthyme. And obviously alarm bells ring, because Jo's like, I don't remember Iris Wildthyme, but she's got all these fake memories in her mind. But the only one person who can solve this sort of mystery is going back to the 1970s at UNIT to encounter with the Doctor. So this is brilliant, because obviously it's Katie Manning playing Iris Wildthyme and an older Jo. So it's really lovely to get to see that sort of dynamic, and it's a great introduction to Iris Wildthyme. But part 2 is the standout part for me, because we see an older Jo meet the 3rd Doctor, and it's just incredibly beautiful and just so heartwarming that the 3rd Doctor can see an older Jo and see how far she's progressed. This was before the Legacy of Time release, the sacrifice of Jo Grant. So this is sort of a precursor to that in a way. So I feel like this is a really lovely story. It's set on Christmas Eve, and it's a really wonderful story. And it's just wonderful. I recommend it just for part 2, just to see the 3rd Doctor and an older Jo interact. Is just really heartwarming, and will make any 3rd Doctor fan's heart just really warm, and it just fills my heart with joy, because it's a really great story, and beautiful. And the 3rd Doctor interacting with Iris Wildthyme, pretty funny stuff as well. Now, Iris Wildthyme and the 3rd Doctor did appear in a PDA book, again written by Paul Mars, which was called Verdigris as well. So I guess, if I read that, there might be a few links to that book within this audio when I next listen to it. But yeah, Find and Replace, really beautiful companion chronicle. Highly recommend it to any 3rd Doctor fan. So this is the penultimate release I'm going to talk about, and that is Relative Dimensions. Yeah, there's quite a lot of 8th Doctor on this list, isn't there? Yeah, I guess the 8th Doctor is the festive Big Finish Doctor, much like the 10th Doctor is the Christmas Doctor of TV. The 8th Doctor is, the Christmas audio Doctor. Relative Dimensions is by Mark Platt, so you're going to get a good story. It's an incredibly simple story. We see the 8th Doctor basically wanting to spend a Christmas in the TARDIS and have, Christmas dinner and do all the sort of stuff you do at Christmas, like board games, all that kind of stuff. So this being set in the TARDIS, it's quite a great story, because we explore more of a TARDIS, we see various companions' rooms, all that. But this is very much the 8th Doctor wanting to make amends for Lucy, because last Christmas wasn't too great with them, because obviously the last Christmas story featuring the 8th Doctor and Lucy was Death in Blackpool. So this is the 8th Doctor's way of trying to say sorry to Lucy. you know, since that Christmas was a bit of a disaster. And he wants, you know, Lucy to meet his family with Susan and his great-great-grandson, I think, Alex. I think that's what it is. But yeah, you can tell that things don't really go to plan for the Doctor, because it's Christmas with the Doctor, so it's not going to be plain sailing, or else it wouldn't really be a story, because it involves a 4-dimensional fish. Yeah, I'll leave you to explore that. But yeah, it's a fun little romp of a story, and McGann, just brilliant. I love Paul McGann, he's fantastic. The final Christmas story I'm going to talk about in this Big Finish Christmas festive listening is the first story in the Paternoster Gang Heritage 4, which is Merry Christmas, Mr. Jago. Now, I haven't experienced any of the Paternoster series bar this story. I literally bought this simply because Jago was in it, and I have been longing for, and that's one thing I wish Big Finish did, was a Jago and Lightfoot Christmas special, and I think this is the closest thing we could get to it, so I thought, well, I'm going to give it a listen. And you know what? It's a lot of fun. We see Jago dressed as Father Christmas, and yeah, let's say he gets invited round to sort of the Paternoster Row, and Strax has had all these defences put in, and Vastra has bidded on this sort of Silurian relic, this sort of creature called the Gribbolite. I think that's what they're called. And instead of Strax giving Vastra the Gribbolite, Strax has the Gribbolite, which he thinks is Mr. Jago's present. And let's say all hell sort of breaks loose with these sort of Gribbolites going all over the house. And it's just a fun, really simple story set at Christmas Eve. And yeah, it's just nice to see Jago have a bit more life outside of the Jago and Lightfoot series. And yeah, that's all I can really say. It's just a really nice little hour-long story. Great to sort of spend Christmas in that sort of Victorian setting, you know, with snow and all that kind of thing. It's just a really nice little story to see Jago interact with the Paternoster Gang, because Lightfoot's off with a lady friend. So Jago spending Christmas on his own, so you know what, he's going to spend Christmas with the Paternoster Gang. So yeah, it's quite fun. You know, you've got the sort of typical sort of Victorian caricature characters in the form of Small Piece, this sort of Del Boy-esque sort of artful dodger type of character in a way, sort of selling this alien tech and all that kind of thing, and Jago sort of doing magic tricks. It's all great. It's all wonderful stuff. So yeah, I really do like it, and it's great to see, you know, more Jago. So that concludes this festive video. I hope you have enjoyed it, and if you haven't listened to any of these Big Finish festive stories, then please do, because they're a lot of fun, and I highly recommend them. And if you have listened to them, maybe this video can make you revisit them, because they're great stories, you know, so why not make the most of this time of year and revisit those stories. So yeah, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it, and again, I wish you all a very Merry Christmas. So please do like and subscribe, it really does help the channel out. And I'll see you next time for more Big Finish related content, whatever that will be. So thank you very much for watching, and Merry Christmas.